in alphabetical order, I'm going to make my first introduction with Andy Aldrin. Name you might be familiar with, the last name there, who knows a thing or two about space exploration and lunar exploration and specifically. But he really brings a unique part to this conversation because he started his career in the space industry and then has now leadership in education at the university level with Embry-Riddle, where he built their space program. Now I think there's a Master of Space Operations there, but he's also working with the K through 12 through his STEM programs that just got funded by the Texas Space Commission here with something called S-Cube, which is giving kind of junior, senior, high schoolers the ability to go build satellites and launch one, which is really cool. I wish we had had that. But Andy, thank you so much for having us with us today. And then we also know that you're kind of a fan of this third wave of space commerce, which I want to hear more about. But next to Andy, we have Bolden. I am very fortunate to be sharing this stage with another Bolden because when I was 22 years old, I met his dad when I was working on Capitol Hill, who had just been off of a space flight before he became a NASA administrator. And, I'm a starstruck kid. I still have this picture, and I'm like, it was great. But your father's amazing, and your family's amazing, and you have some great stories. You have a wonderful podcast, so make sure that after the conversation, you let people know or send them the link to that because it really talks about your origin story, which is amazing. And we can't really talk about building the space cowboys and cowgirls without thinking about, well, where's the corral they're going to train? And, I think the best way to do that is with Dr. Sally K. Janes here, who is the Vice Chancellor for San Jacinto College, or San Jac. Right? And she's out of Houston. She started a couple of things which are really cool and relevant to this. The Edge Center for Aerospace, which is taking kids or, high schoolers out of high school and give them the ability to get hands-on with things like graphite composites, things like welding for titanium welding, all these advanced things that you're going to need there, and also just overall critical thinking. So she has also started a maritime program there. So you have an adjacency, and we're going to get into more of these workforce adjacencies in a minute. So right before we transition to discussion, one of the things that we did at SWIFT, and Dr. Leon Van Stone in the room, is we did a workforce report. And we looked at 5,000 of the 20,000 or so open jobs that we found specifically for the space industry. And we found that roughly half of them do not need a college degree. They need welders, technicians, plumbers, electricians, and skilled trades. And so the key thing is, how do we build the skilled trade pipeline for supporting the workforce that we need to make all of these space programs successful and Artemis successful? So thank you so much. Please welcome Che, Andy, and Sally K. Okay, so I'm really going to stop talking and let you folks do most of the discussion because I am definitely not the smartest one on this panel. I'm the least smart, but for that, I know who to ask. So we're going to start this round about a question for the panel. And this is really, what are some of the challenges in the workforce that you see that would keep us from fulfilling all the needs and all the jobs in the space industry that are required to build Artemis, make that successful, build Starship, make that successful, ULA, make the Vulcan and the Centaur successful? What are some of the things that you've seen that we need to fix? So I'll start it with you, Che.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Heather, the team has done an amazing job. For those who have been around long enough, you know that this has been needed at South by Southwest for a long time. So kudos to them for putting it together. I think it's amazing. Culture, in a nutshell. And I'll use the area that, Andy's father and my father came up is, you could go any place within the NASA ecosystem and ask somebody what they're doing, and they could tell you, we're putting a man on the moon. We're doing this. That was a cultural movement, a cultural belief that I just don't believe exists right now, or if it exists in little bitty pockets that we need to connect.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd say critical thinking, particularly in the commercial economy, because most of us grew up, and I'm a lot older than most of us, in a world where the government told you what you were going to do, and that was clearly the market. Even in the commercial, the SATCOM market, it was all really clear what you wanted to do and how to do it. It's not that way anymore. You got to figure out where the markets are. You got to figure out how to have a business that works. And you go out there, and I look at kind of everything that's going on, and I'm just going to be honest. There's a lot of dumb stuff going on out there that just flat out doesn't make sense. And so there's kind of a lack of critical thinking. And I think in many ways, kind of going back to the last panel, AI can be a wonderful assistant to help you walk through things. But if you don't ask the right questions, you're never going to get the right answer. And so that's kind of the key thing. And in some ways, I don't want to say we need to step out of STEM, but we need to improve what it is, because the mathematics of it all are going to be the easy part.
Yeah, great.
And I agree with both of you. However, I don't have a relative that was intimately involved in the space program.
It might not be a help.
Yeah, yeah.
But before I answer that question, there's something I want to let you all know. And did you all know that back in 1987, Kenny Rogers sang a song that was called Planet Texas? So I want you all to go look it up on Google and listen to it and watch it. It's really neat. It really is.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
Yeah. But what do I think is missing is that, just as was alluded to, we need to change the culture. The government doesn't tell us what to do anymore, and we need to show young folks what they don't know. And we so often think of pipe fitting, welding, construction as, going into one field. At San Jac, we have a fantastic program for petrochemicals and energy and technology. But process tech and welding can be done in any field. And so I think what we need to do is to get curriculum written that includes opportunities for students to see all of the transitional occupations that can come from studying in one field. And I say that because when we look right now at the aerospace industry and wanting to take it more into manufacturing, you have to have the suppliers that provide the nuts and the bolts, so to speak, that the primes need to use for the lunar landers, for the satellites, and things like that. But that workforce isn't immediately necessary. So we need to train these students, change their minds, and let them know, go into a field that you enjoy, but know that it's transitional. And you can get into the aerospace industry and the space industry. Bide your time and get your experience.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I think that's very well taken and timely, given the fact that we need, Leon and I were having dinner the other day, and we're talking with some folks at the restaurant, and said, let's ask a question. How many of you know that we are going to the moon again and launch a return trip to the moon for the first time in over 50 years? And they were like, what? We're doing that? And so it's still, although the folks in this room care about it, that's why we're here, a lot of people don't. And so turning to you, Che, you spent 26 years in the Marines. You graduated from the Naval Academy. You lead the Bolden Group as their CEO, taking this mission forward to show that there is an industry and opportunity for students and young workers to get into, especially around meeting them where they are, which means that they're not always in four-year institutions. They could be in community colleges or other places. How do we expand the space workforce opportunity and the culture for communities that are not as well served as these traditional four-year universities?
So I think one of the things that Andy said earlier about critical thinking is really important. Doing things the way that we know that they're done is not really requiring much thought. That requires rote memorization or learning a skill and just repeating it time and time again. Where we sit right now with respect to where space applies to humanity is we don't know. One of the things that made Mercury and Gemini so powerful is that people were doing something they'd never done before. They captured imagination, and they made people believe that they could do it. Right now, I did it earlier in my speech, and I'll apologize for it. I said, we're not doing it like that anymore. We don't need to do it like that anymore. And I think going back to this comment about the education, we were having a discussion in the green room. My wife is from Australia, and in Australia at year 10, you decide, are you going to go tradesman route or trade skill route or knowledge route? And that makes a big difference. Now, what happens after that is something we could probably take lessons from as well. But what they did is they found that the value is placed on the skill, not on the pathway. And so especially having a junior college, community college, leader here, I want to make the case that we have underbilled them for too long, underfunded them for too long, because that's where the skills are imparted. Learning at a university, I was a history major. I'm a dumb Marine. I don't use that any single day. Oh, by the way, if I get nervous when I'm talking, it's because one of my old instructors is right over there, and he used to chew my ass whenever I said and like and So,
Drop it, give me 20.
Exactly. So, but yeah, the critical thinking part of it just requires people to think, that proverbial outside the box, but just create something new.
Do we need to do anything special to ensure that, I think our crew for the next Artemis mission has good diversity, and so that everybody can see that there is somebody that I can go to. What's your thoughts there?
All right. I'm in Texas, so I'm going to get myself in trouble here. Diversity is not what you think it is, and I think that people need to go to the frickin' dictionary and just read it and learn it. Yeah. Everything we love in this world, and I'll use the main thing that's happening right now, sport in America. Yeah. Give me a team that has the exact same player doing the exact same thing for the exact same purpose. It doesn't exist. Even tennis is not a single mono whatever thing. So we need just to focus on allowing people to do those different things and bringing it to bear, because you just have to get people where they don't expect it. So repeat your question. I got on a soapbox.
No,
Sorry.
I was just thinking, I think as I've learned working with Swift, people think of space program as white lab coats, 4-year GMATs or SATs off the charts, 18. How can I possibly participate in that?
Yeah, so I'm going to share this one with Andy, because when he lived in Webster growing up, it was flight engineers were engineers and astronauts were test pilots. That doesn't exist today, or if it does, it's like a minority within the group. You've got phlebotomists are astronauts nowadays. You've got directors in mission control who did something other than aerospace engineering. So the environment in which people are in is not what we expect that it is. I think if we can let go of, I love For All Mankind, but the scenes of mission control are a little misleading. Just like Top Gun is very misleading for young people trying to fly today. It's not the same. We need to teach them what it is to live and work in space today as it stands. I don't know, what do you think, Andy?
Well, so the first thing I think about is we spend a lot of time talking about a little tiny sliver of the trillion-dollar space economy called human spaceflight. And that's great. Human spaceflight is inspirational, but it is a tiny part of the economy. If you want to look at the big chunks of the economy, they're the stuff you do on the ground. It's communications, it's geospatial. 2/3 of the space economy is on the ground, and half of what's left is actually ground systems, but it's hardware. So we spend a lot of time talking about hardware. The fact is, so far, nobody has yet to make money in space. We're trying to do that with some of the programs with the space station, and maybe that'll work. But money in space is made on the ground. And so what we really need to do is start teaching people, how do you use space to make money on the ground? Because that's where the real money is. That's where the differences are going to be made. And that's the most exciting part of space. If you look at what's going on with geospatial information, we've got 70 different companies building satellites out there, providing all kinds of different data. And right now, they're just basically dumping it down and selling it on a sort of a very vertical pipeline. As that sort of segments, there's going to be all kinds of incredible job opportunities. We need to be ready for what's going to happen in the future. We need to be, as someone has said, you got to skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is right now. And right now, we've got to be mindful of all of that stuff.
Can I ask a really quick question before you talk, Sally Kate? Sure. How many venture capitalists are in here? Okay. So I want you guys to do a little research, because I heard an anecdote. I don't know if it's true. I got it from Twitter or someplace. But 90% of the space market is elsewhere from rockets and satellites. but 90% of the investment is in launch and satellites.
No.
That's not true?
No. In fact, because I do this stuff, I have too much free time on my hands. There's about $327 billion invested in space, private equity capital in space. This is space capital data. 327 billion over the last, I think it's 11 years. Of that, 200 billion is GPS applications.
Okay.
That's just GPS applications. Then you've got SATCOM and the other things that are basically, again, they're making money on the ground.
So I guess the only point of that is, who knows who Astra rockets are? Yeah. You want to? Yeah.
Was that are or were?
So Astra rockets, in my mind, so getting back to the workforce part of this, because that's really what this is about, where people put their money to create these companies. And the fact you've got Cesium Astro that's building something right here in Austin as the host of this is a perfect example. You have to take into account, where your strengths are going to lie. And in rocketry, it's usually going to be the people and their ideas and how they know how to work the problem. It's not on the balance sheet. It's not on answering to the fiduciary responsibilities. That's just not a good model for most of the space industry as we know it right now. And so when you're looking at trying to create a new workforce, really what you need to do is create a condition, and this is, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, getting back to teaching people how to live and work in this environment. How many people actually know the basic skills of working in an extreme environment like the Arctic? Do they know what it means to put metal into a freezing temperature, but there's still water there? That's the kind of stuff we got to think about with space as well.
So if I could ask you, Sadike, specifically in this, because I know you have a lot of experience on this issue, but I think also to take the audience, drive it home, when we were back there, you told me a story about a couple of people that were transitioning from other, maybe they were in a career or in a path which they didn't see a long-term future, and then you gave them the ability to get the experience that launched them in a new trajectory. And I think our audience understanding that will be very helpful in understanding what the Edge Institute is doing and what you're doing at Sanjak.
Well, the two that I mentioned to you, one was a young woman who had her own booth in a cosmetology shop. And she just happened to see something on the news about the Edge Center. And by the way, it's called the Edge Center because it's on the edge of the future, the cutting edge, the leading edge, and the edge of the Houston Spaceport. That's how it got its name. But anyway, she came over to the Edge Center, started looking around. And what's amazing is, and people don't realize it, but those individuals that do nail care and hair care and eyelash care, they are perfect for the aerospace industry because they've got the fine motor skills. So she came in and we put her in our electronics program. She can build those harnesses like you have never seen before. And now she's working with Intuitive Machines, and actually she is a manager of that department. We have another young man that was a surfboarder, had his own surfing shop, built, all these surfboards for people out in the Clear Lake area with composites. Guess what? He came through our composite program, and he's one of the top composite individuals, again, for Intuitive Machines. So there, are a lot of different transitional skills that young folks don't know about. And going back to the point of creative thinking, problem solving, to me, that's the way we need to be teaching. We don't need to preach and tell them what to do. I ran a grant one time, and it was all based on activity. And these teachers were saying, I don't know why she's having us do this. And so when we got through with it all, I said, okay, what particular math skills did you use? What particular things did you have to learn to solve that problem? And so I think that goes in, and I'm running a grant right now all about research. But the scientific method, problem solving, and creative thinking are really synonymous. You just need to look at what level you're doing it. And we need to get the kids off those iPhones, and we need them working with their hands in a classroom where they need to problem solve and know what works and what doesn't.
So I'm going to provide a shameless pitch for what we're doing because I think it's incredibly cool. We are building satellites in 30 high schools in Texas. And we could build the satellite in a semester. That's not hard. We've got an instruction book. You could do that. But we want to stretch it into 2 full years of learning because space gets kids excited. There are 2 things that get kids excited: space and dinosaurs. Right. Well, I was going to say they get over dinosaurs. They don't get over space. The irony of the whole thing is I've never met a kid who didn't love space except one, and I married her. But that's that is absolutely true. But so what I'm getting to is by building satellites, this isn't necessarily about space workforce development. It's about taking the magic of space and getting kids excited, getting kids to feel self-empowered, self-efficacy. Because you take a program like that, you take it out to West Texas, and you've got kids that couldn't imagine building a car, and they're going to build a satellite. And how empowering is that? And so that's what we're doing, but that's taking the magic of space to improve education. And I think it's a super powerful thing. We're really, really excited about getting started on that program. And I think we should be doing that across the country.
Another question. Why space? Why are we talking about space? And I asked that question to my fellow panelists, but I'll ask it to you as well. Why are we talking about space?
The new frontier.
What does that mean?
No, so you know what you're gonna get from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you ever did this with your father, but I will share some insights into the Bolden household and some of the Bolden conversations. Hey, Dad, why do we go to space? Because human beings are natural explorers. Bullshit. Human beings need to find out what's next so we can survive. That's our dynamic. My dad and I get in that argument all the time. I believe that space serves a purpose that actually benefits 8 billion people. My dad believes it serves a purpose that services the 8 billion people, but a different way. The inspiration and the idea of space is enough to get people to move along. I'm a little bit more cynical. I think we need to give people a reason to participate in space. And so that why is really important. Why are we going to go to space? How do we benefit today?
So we were not nearly so philosophical in our household, which permitted me to think a lot about things like why space. And so, I mean, there are 2 kinds of space. Things that are fundamental for what we do on the ground, right? You couldn't survive without GPS, Galileo, whatever, position, navigation, and timing. You need it to do any banking. You need it to drive anywhere. You need it for a lot of things. We would be absolutely helpless without SATCOM. I mean, we rely on ground-based things for most of our communications, but we couldn't get by without having some kind of SATCOM systems. Geospatial information, absolutely dependent upon it for weather, for all kinds of things. That's going to be an area that really explodes. Those are the things that are fundamental that we must do. And the other things are things that are cool to do, inspirational to do, that promote science, that promote education, that do a lot of wonderful things. And if you go to the United States, we have the luxury of doing all of those things. The rest of the world really doesn't. They don't have the luxury of a human spaceflight program. They struggle to do any kind of space science. So they've got to focus on the things that are core. But let's be very honest with ourselves. There are things about space that are fundamental to our survival.
Sally Kay, you work with students that are now in college or community college. Have you heard any consistent patterns about why they're at the edge? Like the surfboard person who says, hey, I'd love to catch a wave. Maybe this is a wave to make more money. Or was a cosmetologist like, I'm looking for something with meaning? What is it for them?
In most cases, they love the idea of space. But generally speaking, we don't always get the ones right out of high school. If they're coming right out of high school, they're coming from the high schools that already have some space programs in the local area. But it's individuals 22 to 30 that have gone out there and just tried something else but want to do something new for the future. And so they come back and learn. They're more mature, quite honestly, and looking for a good pathway. I call them stairways and landings. And a lot of the industry, the aerospace industry, gives them those opportunities because they take a stairway, get a new certification, get a good job, see what else is out there, what else they can do, because they don't realize all of the different opportunities. And as you talk about why space, and I said it's the new frontier, we don't know. And so they're anxious to be a part of that problem solving to find out what else is out there. You know, you think way back when I went and got all those slides that are this big, you know, and run through one of those projectors, all about Landsat. And they come down and they could tell you what all of the agriculture looked like up in Minnesota. You know, we learned a lot from that. I challenge you to go out to the NASA website and find a day in the life of, because then you find out all of the reasons we can go to space and why we go, to bring things back to make what we do here even better. And I think that's what those individuals are looking for.
That's beautiful, Andy.
So we've started 2 programs over the last 4 years. I see one of my faculty members right over there. So we started 2 programs in the last 4 years. The first program has about 1,000 students. The second program, these are graduate programs, about 500. That's 1,500 kids. Fastest growing programs, graduate programs at Embry-Riddle ever. Kids are just excited about it. Now, a lot of them, not kids, most of these students are kind of early to mid-career. They just, first of all, there's kind of a few categories. There's some that just say, oh, okay, I can take classes in space. I want to get a master's degree in something. Maybe I'll get a master's degree in space. And they do. And they separate out pretty quickly. The rest of them think that space is incredibly cool for some reason or another. Most of them want to get a job. A few of them want to start businesses. But it's, as I said, that this is basically almost a genetic thing that they carried through their entire lifetime, that space was cool, and my God, they could have the opportunity to do that. I mean, do you realize there are kids in school right now, probably first grade or something, they're not even at your level, but we are actually doing work with them at the foundation that will be able to apply for jobs on the moon. And it's not going to be an astronaut. It's going to be doing all kinds of things, working on robots on the moon. I had a kid come up to me and say, I want to be a barista on the moon. And I thought, I did the same thing. I laughed, and then I thought about it for a while. Think about this. This is how cool space is. Think about you're standing on the edge of a crater on one of the poles of the moon. Doesn't matter. You turn one way, and you see the Earth. Beautiful, all of the time. You walk down a little bit to the other side of the crater. You have to actually walk into the shade a little bit. And now you've got the clearest view of the stars that you could possibly imagine. That is literally one spot on one planet. And for a human being, there is no cooler place to be. There will be hotels there, and the hotels will need baristas. I can't tell you when, but I can tell you it's going to happen.
I don't know if Nate Argroves is in here in this room right now, but Nate is with Starbase Brewing, the founder of Starbase Brewing, and I don't know, I don't know exactly what his origin story was. He's one of our sponsors, a dear friend and a wonderful person. Make sure to talk with him. But he just brewed yeast for beer on the space station. And he's like, yeah, I want to be the first beer on Mars. And I'm like, that rocks. Like, that is an amazing idea.
Yeah, it's those types of things. There are so many space-adjacent opportunities out there. And shout out to Kelly Kiedis Ogborn, who I think coined that phrase, space-adjacent. It could have been used long before, but, our generation claims credit for everything. So in this particular case, so I'll talk a little bit about what we do, since Andy opened the Pandora's box for that. So I'm the board chair for the Astra Institute. And Astra Institute is a nonprofit that was created to create access and opportunities in the business of space. We use the term business of space instead of space economy or anything like that because we want to focus on value creation. I used that question about why earlier because people always do things for a reason. Either your parents make you do it, you have to do it because the police told you not to do it, or your drill instructor is telling you to do something. There's always a reason for doing it. But for people to get into space, it has to have some value that comes back to them. And the Astra Institute does three things. We convene, we empower, and we lead. Through the convening, we do things like this. We bring people together for not for attribution style discussions. We were having a discussion earlier about adjacent ideas from different industries and how they can really create some energy. That's what we do. 150 people from 150 different sources. And to the point you said about, textiles, one of the young women that attended our very first year was an interior designer. She came in and she designed web designs and interior homes and whatnot, and walking away from spending 2.5 days with us, she's like, all right, I'm going to become an interior designer for space habitats because NASA designs some really boring, useful facilities, but they're not really, if we're talking about long duration space flight, the human mind is just as important as the human body. And so if you don't think about those things, you're not going to be very influential. Lastly, what I'll say is on the influence side of it is, you mentioned STEM earlier, and we've had this discussion. A lot of people will say STEAM or STEAMed. I hate that because STEM was created for a reason. And to introduce the arts in the middle of all that cheapens the arts and it takes the footing out from underneath STEM. We're very parochial. We say STEM plus art and design. So it's an acronym, but it's easy for us to remember. We actually have to put those two things together. Art and design is integral with science, technology, engineering, and math in order for us to be able to do these things. You were an English major, right? I mean, I was a history major. No, you were not an English major. I remember that.
Well, so I mean, you're hitting on something that I think is important, that the world is changing massively. There are parts of our education system that I think work pretty well. I actually think we do a pretty good job in tertiary education, undergraduate, of training people to be engineers, to be lawyers, to be businessmen, whatever, the core skills. I think, and we had this discussion earlier, I think we do a pretty good job there. I think we do okay sort of K through 5, or K through 5th grade, and then we start to lose them. I think one of the areas where we really can do a lot better, and we're starting to pay attention to it now, is so you finish high school, you got 3 things you can do. You can just go off and work at McDonald's. We don't do much to help you there, but I'm not sure I'm going to spend all that much time on that. You can go to a technical college, and I think we're starting to understand that that's really key. That's really key. A lot of nations do that really well. You mentioned Australia. We don't yet, but I think we're the clue bird is starting to land on our nose on that one. That's good. Or you can go to university. We do pretty well as you go to the university. I think what we do, though, is train really good engineers that aren't very good at being decision makers, which is kind of what we're trying to do. But I think most of the education system is pretty good. I think if we focus on those transitions, I think that's where we can make a real difference.
And I agree with you. And that's why I talk about stairways and landings. Because how many of us, just the two of you, how many different jobs have you had? Or different?
I started life as a Sovietologist. Right. Does anybody remember what the Soviet Union was? Was anybody here alive when there was the Soviet Union?
But those, I think the community colleges, and you've got a great one right here at Austin Community College. I do a lot of work with them. But we all have our technical divisions that actually provide an associate degree. So it's not just the basic skills, but they also get some business skills, some training. And don't ever tell me you're training them in soft skills. I cannot stand that word because they will get fired for those first. We call them durable skills because those are the ones that are going to make them a good employee all the way through. And so they really can get that training at a community college and get those certifications. Certifications mean a whole lot more in many industries than a degree with no experience. And most certifications require experience and that hands-on learning. And I think that's very, very important.
So you called them durable skills. I like that. It's much better. But fundamentally, if they can't learn how to communicate and work with other people,
It's a durable skill.
they're going to fail. The best idea in the world is worthless unless you can actually communicate it. And I think that's another thing I think we could, across the board, through all of education, we could do a better job of focusing on communication. And I kind of worry right now that there are a lot of things that are happening with social media and just the way we kind of interact with people that's making that harder.
Hot take, and this is to be provocative. You all just described, you were very prescriptive as to where we go with these things, certificates, things like that. One of the things that came out of these convenings that we had is we realized that we had a participant group that was relatively silent or unheard, if you will. I'm going to refer back to my origin story myself. As a United States Marine, the very first thing we learn about is you're only as good as the Marines that you can keep alive and take care of. And so we learned that no weapon system, no nothing was really worth much in the end unless the Marines were there to be able to do it. And I've kind of carried that through to today. And so we had these young people there because we said, all right, people want to reach out to young folks. So we had high schoolers and college participants there with the CEO of Under Armour, the former head of NASA. They're in the same room. And then finally when we asked them, all right, is this good? They turned around to us and they said, no. And I was like, you're sitting next to the CEO of Under Armour and the former administrator of NASA. And like, yeah, you guys are here and you're listening to us, but you're not hearing us because you're going to walk out of here and there's not going to be anything for us to do after this. You're going to tell us to go back into these programs that you all created that don't necessarily fit for us. And what that reminded me of, you know, the Marine Corps dealt with the very first AI, right? A 17-year-old man or woman out of boot camp is just like AI. You give them a left and right and say, go off and do something. They can either really F some things up or they can do some really cool things. But when you've got that, you learn that you have to ask them, or I shouldn't say ask, we don't ask. You find out what makes them tick. Every single Marine was a different Marine. You had to do something in it to get them motivated to go and do it. And so when we ask these young people, what is it that you want? And they said, ask us what the future is. Ask us what we need to survive. We'll tell you where we want to go, and then you tell us how to get there, but ask us first where we want to go. And that's the problem I think we've not done, is we think we know where we want to go, but the people who are actually going to carry the water, the ones that are coming to San Jack, they're just following what we're telling them to do. So my original hot take, are we telling them too much?
That's a tough one because I see that also working the other way. When I was running a startup, Moon Express, for those of you that you don't have to remember that company because it's gone, after I left, we had, I'll say, kids come in with stellar undergraduate educations that were good engineers, and they figured they'd spend a couple of years with us and they'd go start their own business. And they all failed. And I think some of what we need to do is giving them, I think, a better understanding of the realities of space. And this is more of a graduate level education, perhaps, that, as I said at the very beginning, there's a lot of dumb stuff going on in space, and they need to be able to understand what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And I think there are a lot of hard lessons that people are going to learn in space, and they'll continue to do it. And that process of learning and company failure is a good thing. But as an educator, I feel it's incumbent upon us to help them make the right decisions.
I think the only thing, and I won't monopolize like I've been doing, sorry. Teaching people how to live and work in space is probably the place to start. And once you teach them how to live and work in space, the rest of it is going to kind of find its way, because we talked about this a little bit earlier. Plumbing in 1G and 1 atmosphere, which is where we are right now, is markedly different than plumbing in microgravity. Just as plumbing is different at 5 atmospheres underneath the ocean. These are things that the average person with a trade skill isn't necessarily thinking about. They're thinking about moment arms and screws and whatnot, but they're not thinking about, again, the icebreaker is going to have to perform very differently than a cruise ship. And if they don't understand what it is they're doing, the process by which they're following, they may take a shortcut, not thinking it's any big deal, and all of a sudden it's a failed O-ring and we lose 7 lives.
So,
sorry, that was a bad analogy.
On that, I want to get to this because, okay, you've launched a maritime program, so you have probably more experience with that than you do Edge Institute. I don't know if they were started the same time.
No, Maritime was started in 2009, and we started the Edge Center in 2016.
So what did you need to change from people's when they came into it? Did they have a specific mentality, or what have you learned from there that we can apply into the space? How do we need to steer the students to think differently if they need to go into space program versus a maritime program?
I think we need to give them opportunities, even short term, to discover what happens in the maritime world. I remember some of our first students that in maritime, that we got an internship for the summer, and they got out on this tug and said, I didn't know I was going to be this close to the water. We got them off that and put them into another, started deciding what program they needed to go into. So those are some of the things we learned, that we need to give them the experience in that environment to see if that's an environment that they are going to be comfortable with. And go ahead.
Oh, so because you hit on a point we were just talking about, which is, and then it gets back to your stairs and landings, the transitions. We don't do a very good job of exposing students to the environment that they're going to go work in. And some big companies, Boeing, Lockheed, ULA, have fabulous internship programs, fabulous, but they're kind of the exception. And they're really only for the top engineering undergrads. What we're not doing is taking kids from high schools, from technical colleges, introducing them to somebody that's out there in the industry, doing the kind of stuff that they might be doing, exposing them to how they do problem solving, and giving the students a chance to go solve a problem and fail, but at least they know what it's like to work in that industry.
Correct. Yeah. I think we just have to put them as close as we can into the environment in which they will be working. And teamwork is a big part of that.
I got a question on some recent newsworthy information around Jared Isaacman starting a NASA Force program, workforce program, and trying to recruit people who might not be space career people just to come in and work for NASA for a couple of years, like you would maybe in the Peace Corps. A little different. But do you think that's something that's helpful to raise awareness among students that, I don't have to necessarily have a space career to be able to participate in space? That's kind of one question. And I have a follow-up on, which is, in each of your experiences, if you look at going back to the dinosaurs in space, everybody loves it when you're 8, 9, 10, 11, and then you have this crash of, girls and cars and boys and everything else. And then it gets lost off, except for a small portion.
Morgan Freeman would beg to differ. Dinosaurs. Somebody laugh. Morgan Freeman voiced over this really cool movie that everybody's raving about dinosaurs right now. So,
right. Oh, cool. I mean, do you think this NASA Force is helpful? Do you think
I'm going to.
I cannot. I'm only here to talk about workforce.
Yeah.
Not me.
So let's hold that one for questions. I really do want to touch on
Yep.
I really do want to touch on the question of the NASA Force, and I think it's a great idea. I think it's the wrong place to do it. I can't see NASA doing a great job of training anyone to do anything other than being an employee of NASA. Having said that, I'll tell you that the programs that we created, most of the students coming in don't have it's not required that you have a technical background. And the best students that come in don't really necessarily have an engineering background. They have other broader backgrounds that they bring to bear on it. So I think that's something we really need to get over. And I think in part because a lot of the engineering is going to be done, and appropriately so, with the right engineer running it, by AI. AI will do the calculations. And so the share of the workforce that's going to be required to have a solid background in mechanical engineering is probably going to go down. The share of people that need to understand how to run a business, how to understand a market, how to understand how to work with other people, and how to figure out what's going to work in the market probably isn't going to go down. And so we're going to see kind of a shift in that direction. And so I applaud the idea of more people coming into this industry who aren't engineers necessarily. In fact, being an engineer sort of requires some untraining, because engineers are absolutely programmed to find to answer the question correctly, not to ask the correct question.
And so, Sally Kay, I would lead that into you, because I'm really curious how AI is, how you think about that within the community college system, and whether you are hearing any concerns about that impacting your people pursuing a community college, or will it accelerate you because they need hands-on experience?
I think back over the years, and we're just calling it AI now because it's faster. But, over time, we were getting data, we were getting information, and it was being, brought together. My fear is that students and anybody doesn't learn how to use AI. AI goes out and when you ask it a question, it very quickly scans the information and gives you the average answer. So if you want to stay average, stay going and ask an AI. If you want to be better, then use AI to ask yourself questions and move further and go deeper into the questioning, so that you get a variety of answers that you can work and use to your benefit, so that you're no longer average. So at many colleges, AI is encouraged in the classroom as long as it is well documented, because I can tell you, I can read the same answers from different students. They look a little different, but they still have those same little tweaks that AI uses. So you can pick out, what's going on. But we encourage them to use AI so that we can correct the direction that they're going in and use it appropriately. It's a fantastic tool, but we just have to learn how to use it correctly.
I think it kind of takes the last step, because I get a lot of junk from students who will go out and pull junk out and say, well, this is the market for human spaceflight. And then it's incumbent on me as the teacher to beat them up, to basically say, you say that there's going to be, I'm just going to make up numbers so I won't get in too much trouble, $1 billion a year in the suborbital launch market. How many flights would that take? How many vehicles would it take? Is that even possible? And it takes about 15 seconds to just go, okay, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. But now you're starting to teach them to ask the second question of their, I use AI as a graduate student. And like any graduate student, you got to beat them up and figure out when they get the right answer, when it makes sense. But we need to teach people how to ask the right question and how to know they're getting something that is approximating the right answer. But, I've said it probably 3 times in this. The right question, the wrong answer is infinitely better than the right answer and the wrong question. And we've spent an awful lot of time teaching students how to ask the wrong question so that they can get the right answer.
I need someone to change my mind that AI is not the evolutionary challenge of the scientific calculator for our times. It's a tool. But back to your question on NASA Force. It is my opinion that Jared Isaacman is probably the right person for the job in this time. And if you have looked at some of the stuff that went into his thinking for Inspiration 4, Polaris Dawn, and then eventually into his leading up to his confirmation, I would encourage you to not focus on the thing right now and the name thing right now, and look at what his objective is. And he said it, and it's in writing. He essentially wants to create, Starfleet Academy, something along those lines for the future. And so the path that he's taking, this is something that Andy's dad got the experience that my dad didn't get the experience, during that time, the culture of innovation at NASA was, we didn't know anything, so let's try this. There's a lot more risk that was accepted, and risk. When I say risk, I mean just the uncertainty, not danger. The uncertainty was accepted.
There was plenty of danger.
There's plenty of danger, but when I use the term risk, I'm referring to uncertainty, not danger. But what I believe Administrator Isaacman is trying to do is get people to start thinking about how do we start to cultivate a culture that leads to an organization or a thought, a body that can lead into the future. Because right now, if you're not familiar with it, Jared is very much in line with commercialization. And so there's going to be a lot more stuff being pushed away from NASA that was traditionally in their wheelhouse in order to focus on the things that only NASA can do. That is my observation of what he's doing. I haven't spoken to him about it, so I don't know if that's the end state. But to that NASA force, I think it's a means to an end. And if we allow him to trial and error things without coming down so hard on him, label him a rogue administrator or something like that, I think we'll be okay.
I'm going to go off script here because we're close to the end of it. But I've got a couple of folks here on the stage that have experiences that most, if not everybody else in the room doesn't, which is to see their parent get on a rocket and risk their lives to go into orbit, and in this case, to the moon. How can someone who doesn't have a parent that's an astronaut, how do we process? What is the closest you could put that into our terms? Because it seems to be terrifying that I would have my parent get on a spacecraft. Now I heard a story about you, which was pretty good. But Che, I wanna take how did you process that as a kid?
Well, the first time my dad went to space, I watched it from the TV and the couch of my best friend's house because I had missed enough school that my dad is like, you got to go back to school. I don't care what's happening. So I was back in Clear Lake, Texas, getting ready to go to school. I watched my dad from, waking up on a pull-out couch. So my emotions at that moment weren't quite, I think, comparative to other ones. The next time I saw it, so my father's first flight was in 1986. It was launched on January 12th and landed 10 days prior to Challenger. And so we didn't get very much time to kind of experience the emotions of that because Challenger happened right after that. But his very next flight was after the return to flight. And so now I'm a midshipman at the Naval Academy. I know a little bit more about the engineering behind it and the danger and all those things. And so I'm scared shitless. Sorry, can we say that?
No, we're at South by. It's cool.
All right, fair enough. South by, right? It's weird. In that point, the only thing that held it together for me was that I was next to my mother, and I felt that I needed to hold it together for my mother, or else I would have crumbled under the weight of seeing my father on a Roman candle that just a couple years ago we'd seen blow up. So that was my experience. But we had a lot more certainty, believe it or not, than you did.
So you've heard the story, evidently. I'm not changing it.
I love it.
Right,
Because we're going to tie it in here, I promise, is the last.
Okay, so I grew up in Nassau Bay, not Clear Lake or Webster, Nassau Bay. And in Nassau Bay, we lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. So there's 5 houses across the back. 3 of them were astronauts. One of them was Alan Bean, who flew on the mission after my dad. You couldn't swing a dead cat at Webster Elementary without hitting an astronaut's kid, right? They were everywhere. So that part wasn't a big deal. I mean, it's just like, okay, your dad's going up on this mission? Yeah, it's a pretty cool mission. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. No, I'm serious, though. This is the environment we grew up in because almost everyone in Nassau Bay was either an engineer working at the Manned Space Flight Center or something very closely aligned with it. And so that was just it. That was our environment. That was normal. Dad's going to the moon. Yep. And so I'm 11 years old, and Dad's walking on the moon. And when you're 11 years old, take yourself back. There's nobody in here. Is there anybody? Anyway, I've done this in front of 11-year-olds, and they agree with me. What is your father's #1 job in the world? To embarrass you.
That's right. It's
In front of the more people, the better. And my dad is up there in front of 300 million people. I didn't care about most of those people. I cared about my 25 classmates, right? There was a cable that was going down, and my dad's from the lunar module to, I think, a seismometer. And my dad had already talked to me about how he's going to hop around on the moon and all that, because you can't really run, you can't really walk, you're going to hop. So he's hopping around on the moon, and there's this cable, and I'm sure he's going to trip on it, fall flat on his face in front of 300 million people and my 25 classmates. And thankfully but I mean, I'm serious. That is what I was thinking. The only thing that really frightened me was my dad didn't have a good story on what happens if the lunar ascent engine doesn't work. And so ironically, this I didn't find out for a decade afterwards. Ironically, when they got through with the spacewalk, Neil, of course, got the hammock, such as it was. Dad slept on the floor, and he finds this piece of plastic. It's actually a actuator switch to some circuit breaker somewhere. And he looks around and he goes, well, what circuit breaker? Oh, ascent engine arm. So literally the switch that was going to depress the ascent, open the circuit for the ascent arm was broken. And of course he whipped out his Fisher pen. Actually, I didn't have Fisher pens, nevertheless. I get in trouble for that one. But he could have used a steel pen, which would have done all kinds of nasty things, he thought. His finger wouldn't fit in. And so after waiting on Houston to solve the problem, which they didn't, I don't think Houston was really all that nervous about it, to be honest with you. It was kind of false drama, because he just pulled out a felt-tip pen, depressed the circuit, and it all went. But it's a great story.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And Sally Kay, we were in the ready room here before we came out, and you had that experience about worrying that you were going to be embarrassed in front of all your kids and the rest of the world because your dad, fell on his back, right? But Sally Kay, you had a different experience on that day, right? Tell me a little bit about what that was.
You mean in '69?
Yeah, that's 69.
In Thank you.
Right.
How much do I owe you?
See, I knew I was the oldest person here.
Oh, I was there, so.
You were there.
One of my aunts loved to go on tours, and so for my graduation present from college, she took me on a tour of Europe. And we were in a restaurant on the Eiffel Tower when the United States landed on the moon. And I can still get choked up when I think about all of the people in that restaurant that were not Americans cheering for what we had done. And I told my aunt at that time, I said, I am going to be a part of that one day. And that was in the late 60s. In the late 70s, I moved to Houston, and they had just allowed women to apply to be astronauts. I had a master's in math. Why not try? So I applied. Didn't get it. In the 80s, I applied again. I was taking a graduate course and got to meet June and Dick Scobie. In fact, I drove June to the airport for one of Dick's flights. And with that, we had the Teacher in Space project. So I applied to be part of the Teacher in Space project. I got pretty close to the top 10, didn't make it. But I still kept wanting to be a part of aerospace. So then in the 90s, I started doing projects with a Space Tech and NSF, and ended up being with the San Jack's aerospace program. And we had a small program. But in the 21st century, 2006, I was asked to fly an experiment 0G. And at that point, I felt like I was an astronaut, and the college gave me a shirt that says San Jacinto's astronaut. And, now I oversee our aerospace program. I encourage students to be a part of it. And, I want them to know, don't give up your passion. You may have to, move differently. That's where I think of stairways and landings. But don't ever give up your passion. You can be a part of it in some way, shape, or form. And so, that's what I'd kind of like to leave you all with.
I think it's great. I think it's inspirational, obviously. When you heard, France is clapping for the United States, like, hey, let's take that as a win. But seriously, like, we can bring the entirety of the world coming together here for something Y space going back into this. So I want to say thank you to my panel, to Sally Kay, to Che, to Andy. These are the heroes, and make sure and have a drink with them, apparently. Are we open now? Is the bar open or somewhere?
It's now beer time.
Interastra.space. If you're curious about what I was talking about, you can find a lot of stuff there.